The door to Christian's office slammed open. Chloe's head snapped up from the afternoon files, her heart kicking hard against her ribs. Christian Kingsley stood in the doorway, his charcoal suit immaculate, but something was wrong. His jaw was clenched tight, too tight. His green eyes, usually calm and controlled, burned with something dangerous. "My office. Now." His voice was low, controlled, like thunder before a storm. In 3 years as his assistant, she'd never heard that tone directed at her. Her hands trembled as she stood, smoothing her skirt. She followed him inside. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence was crushing. He turned, pinned her with those green eyes. "Who is sending you flowers?" Chloe blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The flowers. Pink roses this morning, tulips yesterday, lilies the day before." Each word was sharp, cutting. "Who is he?" Heat flooded her face. It was true. For 3 days, bouquets had arrived, from Daniel, an old college friend. They'd had dinner twice. But why was Christian— "I didn't know you paid attention to who receives flowers in the office." "I don't. Too fast, too defensive. But you've been leaving at 5 o'clock. You used to stay late. Now you disappear the moment the clock strikes 5, and you're different." "Different how?" His jaw worked. "Happier." The word sounded like it hurt him to say. Chloe's throat went dry. "Christian, I don't understand why." "How long have you been seeing him?" He took a step closer. "Who is he? Is it serious?" The questions were too intimate, too personal, not questions a boss should ask. Chloe felt confusion swirl with something else, something dangerous, hope. Then she remembered something, a memory that suddenly blazed bright. "2 weeks ago," she said, her voice steadying, "Lauren from accounting received flowers. You walked past her desk, congratulated her. You said she was lucky to have a man who valued her publicly." Christian went completely still. "So why?" Chloe continued, her eyes searching his. "Were you happy for her? But with me? You look furious?" The silence stretched between them, heavy, charged. Christian opened his mouth, closed it, ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd never seen from him. Ever. He'd realized, and she'd realized, this wasn't professional concern. This was jealousy. "You're right," he finally said, his voice rough. He turned away, putting his back to her. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." He walked to his desk, put it between them like a barrier. "You can go. Good night, Chloe." But his shoulders were rigid. His hands weren't quite steady. Chloe turned toward the door, her heart hammering. Her fingers touched the handle. Why did he react like that? And why, for the first time in 3 years, did she feel like maybe she wasn't as invisible as she'd thought? Chloe didn't sleep. The scene in Christian's office replayed in her mind all night, the fury barely contained in his green eyes, the way he'd asked about Daniel like each word physically hurt him, the jealousy she'd never imagined existed. She arrived at the office an hour early, hoping for empty silence. Time to think, time to breathe. But when the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, he was already there. Christian stood beside her desk, holding something. When he looked up and saw her, there was a flash, vulnerability, raw and exposed, before the mask slammed back into place. "Good morning," he said, too formal, too careful. On her desk sat a coffee cup, not the generic office machine coffee, a cappuccino with cinnamon. Exactly how she liked it. From the cafe 3 blocks away, the place she'd mentioned once, months ago, in passing. He'd remembered. Chloe's hands trembled as she set down her bag. "Christian, you didn't have to—" "I was already there," he said quickly. A lie. She could hear it in his voice. She picked up the cup. The warmth seeped into her palms. She remembered another time 3 years ago when she'd stayed late finishing a report. She'd been exhausted, running on fumes. Christian had appeared in her doorway with takeout. "You skipped lunch. Don't make it a habit." His voice had been harsh, but the gesture. 2 years ago, her father's surgery. She told no one at work, but somehow Christian found out. He'd personally rearranged her schedule, told her to work from home. When she returned, yellow gerbera daisies sat on her desk. To brighten your day, the unsigned card read. She'd known it was him. 1 year ago. A meeting with an important client. The man had dismissed her, called her the little secretary. Christian, who never raised his voice, never showed emotion, had looked at the man with ice in his eyes. Ms. Cooper is my personal assistant. Without her, this company wouldn't function. Apologize. Now. The billionaire investor had apologized. 3 years of small kindnesses, 3 years of protection she'd told herself meant nothing. Why do you do this? The question escaped before she could stop it. Christian looked up from his phone. Do what? Care about me. The words hung between them, heavy, dangerous. For a moment he looked like he might answer honestly. His lips parted. His eyes softened. Then his phone rang. Saved by the bell. He answered immediately, his entire demeanor shifting. In seconds, he was CEO Kingsley again, cold, efficient, handling a stock crisis with surgical precision. Chloe watched the transformation, the mask sliding back into place with practiced perfection. But then he covered the phone, looked at her. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Because you deserve someone who cares. And then he was back on the call, barking orders about market positions and investor confidence, as if those words hadn't just shattered her entire understanding of the past 3 years. Chloe sank into her chair, the cappuccino warm in her shaking hands. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Dinner tonight? I'm excited to see you again. She stared at the message, then looked through the glass wall of Christian's office. He was on the phone, pacing, all business. But for one devastating second, his eyes met hers. The intensity there made her breath catch. She looked back at Daniel's text, at the simple, uncomplicated offer of dinner with a nice man who made her laugh, who didn't confuse her, who didn't make her heart race and break at the same time. But when she looked back at Christian, the question burned through her mind like fire. Does he feel the same thing I've been feeling for 3 years? Or am I seeing something that isn't there? Christian Kingsley never lost control, never. It was the rule that defined him since he'd taken over the company at 25. Control was everything. Control was survival. But today, watching Chloe laugh into her phone, voice soft, cheek flushed pink, while clearly talking to him, Christian felt something wild and irrational clawing inside his chest. Jealousy. He hated the word, hated feeling it even more. But he couldn't stop hearing her laugh. Couldn't stop imagining the man on the other end making her smile like that. A smile Christian rarely earned, and that realization was unbearable. He tried to focus. Meetings, calls, reports. Nothing worked. Because Chloe was right there, just beyond the glass, and every time she smiled at her phone, it felt like a knife twisting deeper. At 4:45, she knocked on his door. Christian, I'm leaving a bit early today. I have a commitment. Not a date. A commitment. But he knew what it was. With him? The words escaped before he could filter them. Chloe blinked, surprised. That's not your business. Technically, she was right, but rationality had left the building. You barely know him, Christian said, standing. It's not wise to go out with someone you— I've known him for 6 years, Chloe interrupted, her voice steady now, firm. We studied together. He's kind, polite, and he doesn't act like he owns me. The last word was a sharp blade. Owner. Was that how he looked? Possessive? Controlling? Chloe took a step forward. For the first time in 3 years, there was challenge in her brown eyes. What's happening, Christian? Why do you suddenly care who I go out with? You never cared before. I always cared. The words shot out before he could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe stared at him, lips parted in shock. Christian realized what he'd just admitted, and there was no taking it back. You always cared, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Christian closed his eyes, tried to find his composure, but when he opened them, the vulnerability was still there, raw and exposed. Yes, always. But why? Chloe's voice cracked. There was pain there, hope mixed with fear. Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did I have to? Her phone rang. Daniel. The name flashed on the screen between them like a cruel reminder of reality. Chloe looked at the phone, then at Christian. He could see the war inside her, logic versus heart, safety versus risk. Then, with a trembling breath, she answered. Hi, Daniel. Yes, I'm leaving now. She walked out without looking back, leaving Christian alone with the truth that had just exploded between them. He didn't just care. He was completely, hopelessly in love with her. Monday morning, 8:30. Chloe walked into the office and froze. Christian was waiting, leaning against her desk, arms crossed. He looked impeccable as always, but there was something new in his green eyes. Determination. We have dinner with Nakamura Corp executives tonight. Your presence is mandatory, he announced. Chloe frowned. But the Nakamura meeting isn't until next week. Why? Schedule change, he interrupted, handing her a tablet. And Wednesday, dinner with the board of directors. Friday, charity event for the Kingsley Foundation. You're coming with me, to all of them. Chloe looked at the list. 3 events. All at night. All exactly when she'd normally be seeing Daniel. She looked up, incredulous. Christian, is this on purpose? It's work, he replied. But his eyes said something else entirely. The dinner with Nakamura Corp was at an exclusive Japanese restaurant. Chloe sat beside Christian, trying to focus on conversations about investments and Asian expansion, but her mind was split in two. Daniel had called 3 times. She hadn't answered. Christian was at the peak of his performance, charismatic, intelligent, commanding the table with natural ease. But every so often his hand brushed hers when reaching for a document. He filled her water glass before she even noticed it was empty. When one of the executives made an inappropriate joke, Christian immediately changed the subject, protecting her without fanfare. Small gestures, constant, impossible to ignore. At midnight, when they finally left the restaurant, Chloe was exhausted, but also confused. Why are you doing this? She asked in the elevator, alone for the first time all night. Doing what? Keeping me busy, preventing me from seeing Daniel. Christian stared at her. No more subterfuge in his eyes. Because I can't stand the idea of you with him. The confession was direct, brutal, honest. Chloe felt the air leave her lungs. Christian, I know, he interrupted, running a hand through his hair. I know it's wrong. I'm your boss. You work for me. I have no right to feel this way. But I can't. He stopped, jaw clenched tight. I can't stop. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. Neither of them moved. And what do you want me to do with that? Chloe's voice trembled. You're confusing me, Christian. You treat me like I'm special. But you never do anything. And now when I finally try to move on, you don't move on, he said, and his voice was pure desperation. Please, not with him. The elevator doors started to close. Christian held them open, but Chloe was already stepping out, heart breaking. Then give me a reason not to, she said over her shoulder. And she disappeared into the night, leaving him there, destroyed by his own cowardice. The next morning, Chloe arrived determined to keep professional distance, but Christian intercepted her the moment the elevator doors opened. You're coming with me to the annual investor retreat, he announced without preamble. This weekend, Mountain Resort, 3 days. Chloe stopped, stunned. The retreat? Christian, that event is only for you and major shareholders. I've never... You're going now, he said, firm. I need you there. There was something in his voice. Not an order. Almost a plea. The days leading up to the retreat were an uncomfortable dance. Christian was more present than ever, reviewing presentations with her, making sure she had appropriate clothing. It gets cold in the mountains, asking if she needed anything. Daniel kept calling. Chloe finally answered one of the calls. The conversation was difficult. "You're avoiding me," Daniel said, hurt in his voice. "What happened? I thought we were doing well." "I'm confused," Chloe admitted. "About a lot of things. It's because of him, isn't it? Your boss." Chloe didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. "Chloe," Daniel said, gentle but firm, "be honest with me, and be honest with yourself. Are you with me, or are you waiting for a man who might never have the courage to choose you?" The call ended. Chloe stared at her phone, the question echoing in her mind. Friday came. In the private helicopter heading to the mountains, Christian finally broke the silence. "I know I have no right to ask this," he began, looking out the window. "But I need you to know. These 3 years with you have been the best of my life. Before you, I was just existing, building empires, but living in an empty fortress." He turned to face her. "You brought light to a place where I thought there would never be any, and I was too much of a coward to admit it until it was too late." Chloe felt tears burning. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because after this weekend," he said, voice rough, "I'm going to let you go, if that's what you want. But first, I needed you to know." The helicopter landed. Below, the luxury resort glowed against the mountain sunset. Beautiful, romantic, perfect. And Chloe realized with a shiver, the next 3 days would change everything. "Welcome," Christian said, offering his hand to help her down. She hesitated for a second, then accepted. His hand wrapped around hers, warm and firm, and neither of them let go. The first night of the retreat was a formal dinner. Chloe descended the resort staircase in the navy blue dress Christian had insisted on buying. "It's part of the dress code," he'd said. But the way he looked at her now said something entirely different. He stood waiting in the lobby. When he saw her, he stopped completely. His green eyes traveled over every inch of her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush hot. "You're stunning," he said. There was nothing professional in the way he looked at her. At dinner, they were introduced to major investors, powerful men and women who spoke of billions the way others spoke of dollars. Chloe should have felt intimidated, but Christian never left her side. He made a point of including her in every conversation. "This is Chloe Cooper," he told a Japanese investor, "the smartest person in this room." After dinner, there was a cocktail reception on the terrace overlooking the mountains. Chloe stood admiring the stars when a voice startled her. "So, you're Kingsley's famous assistant." She turned. Marcus Hale, a British investor known for his predatory charm. He stood too close, his smile too confident. "I must say," Marcus continued, his eyes traveling over her without disguise, "when I heard he was bringing his assistant, I expected one of those serious ladies with glasses. But you're a pleasant surprise." Chloe stepped back. "Mr. Hale, Marcus, please," he insisted, stepping forward. "Tell me, darling, are you just an assistant, or are there other arrangements?" The insinuation was clear and repulsive. Before Chloe could respond, a hand settled on her waist. Christian appeared beside her, and the temperature around them plummeted. "Mr. Hale," Christian said, his voice soft but dangerous. "Watch your tongue. You're speaking to someone under my protection." Marcus laughed, but there was nervousness in the sound. "Ah, so that's how it is. Kingsley, I didn't know you'd claimed—" "Careful," Christian interrupted. Now there was nothing soft in his voice, pure threat. "Finish that sentence, and you'll discover how quickly I can pull $200 million in investment." The silence that followed was tense. Marcus, realizing he'd crossed a line, retreated. "Sorry, no offense meant. Good night," and disappeared. Chloe was trembling, not from fear, but something more complex. Christian still stood beside her, his hand on her waist, protective and possessive. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low. "Yes, Christian, thank you, but you didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted, turning her to face him. "I always do when it comes to you." The music changed to something slow, romantic. Couples began dancing on the terrace. Christian looked at Chloe, then at the dance floor, then back to her. "Dance with me," he said. Not a question. "Christian!" She hesitated, but he was already pulling her gently toward the floor, and then they were dancing under the stars, his hand on her waist, hers on his shoulder. So close she could feel his warmth, his heart beating against hers. "I can't pretend anymore," Christian whispered, his mouth near her ear. "Not when I'm this close to you." Chloe closed her eyes, the world spinning. "Pretend what?" "That you're not the only thing that matters." When she opened her eyes, she found his, green, intense, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. This wasn't her boss anymore. This was a man completely in love. The music ended, but they didn't move. Christian and Chloe stood frozen in the middle of the terrace, faces inches apart, breaths tangled together. The rest of the world had disappeared. "Chloe," he murmured, and there was a question in the way he said her name. She should step back, should remember he was her boss, that this was impossible, that Daniel existed. But none of it mattered, because the way he was looking at her, like she was the only person in the universe, was everything she'd ever wanted. "Christian," she whispered back. A surrender. He leaned in. She leaned in. And then, a camera flash blinded them. They separated instantly, the moment shattered. An event photographer, capturing spontaneous investor moments. The man apologized and hurried away. But the damage was done. Reality had invaded their bubble. Christian ran a hand through his hair, frustration written across his face. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. I'm your boss, and you're—" "Don't say I'm with Daniel," Chloe interrupted, voice trembling. "Not when you almost kissed me." "Aren't you?" His eyes searched hers. Chloe took a deep breath. Honesty. She owed them both that. "I was trying to forget you, because you never gave any indication that—" Her voice broke. "Christian, you confuse me. You're kind, protective, jealous, but you never say anything, and I can't keep guessing." Christian stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he took her hand. "Come with me." He led her off the terrace, through luxurious corridors, until they reached his suite. Chloe should have been nervous, but something in his determination calmed her. Inside, Christian walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit mountains. "When you were hired," he began, voice low, "I was in a very dark place. My life was just work. I didn't let anyone close because I didn't think it was worth it. But then you walked into my office with that genuine smile and that fierce competence, and something changed." He turned to face her. "The first 6 months, I tried to ignore it. You were my employee. It was wrong. But the more time I spent with you, the more I realized you weren't just indispensable to my work. You became indispensable to me." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Chloe whispered. "Because I'm your boss. Because there's a power hierarchy. Because if I said something and you felt pressured to reciprocate, I'd hate myself. I never wanted you to feel trapped or obligated, so I stayed silent. And that was selfish too, because I left you not knowing." Chloe moved closer, heart in her throat. "What if I told you I don't feel trapped? That I feel free for the first time? Because I finally know I'm not crazy for feeling this?" Christian closed his eyes as if her words were both blessing and torture. "Chloe, if I touch you now, I won't want to stop." "Then don't stop," she whispered. This time when he leaned in, there were no cameras, no interruptions. Just them, and the kiss they'd waited 3 years for. Soft at first, then desperate. then impossible to stop. A kiss that said everything they'd never spoken. Chloe woke slowly, sunlight filtering through the curtains. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then she felt the weight of an arm around her waist, the warmth of another body beside hers, and the memory of last night crashed over her like a wave. Christian. She was in Christian's bed. She turned carefully. He was sleeping, his face relaxed in a way she rarely saw. Without the mask of the ruthless CEO, he looked younger, vulnerable, beautiful. And she realized, with a mixture of joy and terror, there was no going back. They'd crossed the line completely. Christian woke. The first look he gave her was pure adoration. "Good morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, blushing. They stayed there for a moment, just looking at each other, processing the enormity of what had happened. Then Christian touched her face, his thumb caressing her cheek. "I don't regret it," he said, firm. "Not any of it. But I need to know, do you regret it?" "No," Chloe answered without hesitation. "But Christian, what do we do now? With work? With everything?" The question hung in the air. Reality was knocking at the door. Before Christian could answer, his phone rang. An urgent call. One of the major investors needed him for an emergency meeting in 30 minutes. Chloe returned to her own suite to get ready. In the hallway, she encountered Marcus Hale, the troublesome investor from last night. He saw her coming from Christian's wing and raised an eyebrow. "Well, well," he said, smile insinuating. "Looks like Kingsley's legendary self-control finally failed." Chloe's blood went cold. "Mr. Hale, don't worry, darling," he said, walking past her. "Your little secret is safe with me. For now." The threat was clear, and Chloe realized, if their relationship became public like this, it would be a scandal. Christian would be seen as a boss who took advantage of an employee. She'd be seen as an opportunist. Everything Christian had worked for could be tarnished. At the meeting, Chloe sat behind Christian, trying to maintain professional composure. But Marcus kept casting insinuating glances at her, and she saw Christian notice. His jaw tightened, but he couldn't do anything without drawing more attention. When the meeting ended, Christian pulled her to a corner. "What did he say to you?" Chloe hesitated. She could lie, protect him from worry. Or be honest and face this together. "He knows," she said simply, "about last night." Christian's face hardened. "Let me handle this." "No," Chloe said, firm. "That will only make it worse. Christian, maybe we should step back, before this becomes a bigger problem." "Step back?" he repeated, incredulous. "Chloe, I told you I don't regret this, and I won't let a man like Marcus Hale dictate." "It's not about him," she interrupted, voice breaking. "It's about you, your reputation, your company. I won't be the reason you—" "You're not a reason. You are the reason," he said, holding her face. "For everything that matters." The last day of the retreat was thick with tension. Chloe and Christian kept their distance in public, but the pull between them was impossible to hide. Every glance was loaded, every accidental touch, electric. During the final lunch, Marcus Hale made his move. He was presenting a risky investment, and subtly but clearly, he made insinuating comments about conflicts of interest and decisions based on other influences. Christian remained outwardly calm, but Chloe saw the cold fury in his eyes. Then, to everyone's surprise, Christian stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," Christian began, his voice firm and clear. "Before we continue, there's something I need to clarify." Chloe's heart hammered. What was he doing? "Insinuations have been made about my professional and personal integrity, and I will not allow them to stand unanswered." He paused. "Ms. Cooper is not just my assistant. She is the most competent, dedicated, and brilliant person I have ever worked with. Any suggestion that our professional relationship is anything less than excellent is not only incorrect, but offensive." He looked directly at Marcus, And if anyone at this table has a problem with how I conduct my business or my personal life, you can stand and leave now. There will be no hard feelings. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus Hale, realizing he'd been beaten, forced a smile. No offense intended, Kingsley, just making observations. Your observations are not welcome, Christian replied coldly, and neither is your investment. A collective gasp. Christian Kingsley had just publicly rejected millions in investment because a man had insulted Chloe. It was a powerful statement and risky. But then, one of the oldest investors, a Japanese woman named Mrs. Tanaka, began clapping slowly. Well said, Mr. Kingsley. Integrity is more valuable than easy money. Others began to agree. Marcus Hale, humiliated, withdrew. Christian looked at Chloe across the room, and she saw it clearly. He had chosen her, in front of everyone, without hesitation. After the meeting, as they packed to leave, Christian came to Chloe's suite. He said nothing, just held her, long and tight, as if she were his anchor. You didn't have to do that, Chloe whispered against his chest. Yes, I did, he replied, because you deserve to be defended, and because I won't hide what I feel anymore. But Christian, your company will survive. It always survives. But me? I don't survive without you. He pulled back to look into her eyes. So tell me, what do you want? Because I'll respect your decision, whatever it is. Chloe closed her eyes, the weight of the choice crushing. Her mind was at war, logic against heart, fear against hope. I need time, she finally said, to think. To make sure we're doing this for the right reasons. Christian nodded, though the pain was visible. How much time do you need? I don't know, she admitted, tears threatening. But I promise I'll give you an answer, a real answer. Monday morning. Chloe stood in front of the Kingsley Industries building, staring up at 50 floors of glass and steel. She hadn't slept properly since they'd returned from the retreat. Her mind had been a whirlwind of questions. What if it goes wrong? What if I'm seen as an opportunist? What if this ruins his career? What if I'm not enough? But there was one question that rose above all the others. What if I let fear stop me from living the only true love story I've ever had? She took a deep breath and walked inside. At the office, Christian was in his office, visibly tense. When he saw her, there was hope and fear in his eyes. They hadn't had personal contact since Sunday. Good morning, he said. Too formal. Good morning, she replied. The day passed in excruciating tension. They worked side by side, professional, but every accidental glance was loaded with unasked questions. At the end of the day, as Chloe was about to leave, Christian called her. My office, please. She entered, heart pounding erratically. This was the moment. But before either could speak, there was a knock on the door. Jennifer from Human Resources. And she wasn't alone. 2 corporate lawyers stood with her. Mr. Kingsley, Ms. Cooper, Jennifer began, uncomfortable. We've received an anonymous complaint about a possible inappropriate relationship between superior and subordinate. We're obligated by corporate policy to investigate. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. Marcus Hale. He hadn't given up. Christian, however, remained calm. I understand. And what does this investigation entail? Separate interviews. Communication review. And during the investigation, it would be advisable for Ms. Cooper to be transferred to another department or temporarily placed on paid leave. No, Christian said, firm. Jennifer blinked. Mr. Kingsley, it's standard protocol. No, he repeated, firmer. Because there's nothing inappropriate to investigate. Ms. Cooper is an exemplary employee, and any insinuation otherwise is defamatory. One of the lawyers leaned forward. Mr. Kingsley, if there is a personal relationship, it's better to admit it now. That would make things— There is, Chloe interrupted, surprising everyone, including Christian. There is a personal relationship. She turned to Christian, seeing the shock and hope in his eyes. Then she looked back at Jennifer and the lawyers. But not the way you're thinking. Christian never took advantage of his position. He never made me feel pressured or uncomfortable. The truth is, she took a deep breath. The truth is we fell in love, and I refused to admit it for 3 years because I thought it was impossible. But it's not. And if that violates any policy, then I resign. The silence in the room was absolute. Chloe, Christian started, but she raised her hand. No, Christian. You've protected me long enough. Now it's my turn to protect you. Christian dismissed everyone from the room with a firm gesture. The moment they were alone, he turned to Chloe, his face a mixture of admiration and frustration. You're not resigning, he said, categorical. I've already decided, Chloe replied, steady. I won't let this hurt you or the company. I'll leave, find another job, and then... And then what? You think I'm going to let you walk out of my life because of some stupid corporate policy? Christian stepped forward, the intensity in his eyes paralyzing her. Chloe, if you leave, I leave too. Don't be ridiculous. This is your company. And you are my life, he fired back, and the declaration left them both breathless. Christian ran a hand through his hair, clearly trying to compose himself. I'm sorry, I didn't plan to say it like that. But it's the truth. These 3 years with you were the only ones where I felt truly alive. And if I have to choose between the company and you, I choose you. Always. Chloe felt tears burning. Christian, you built this. Since you were 25, I can't. You can, and you will, because I've already made my decision. He took her hands. I'll speak with the board. I'll propose a hierarchy restructure. You won't be my direct subordinate anymore. You'll report to the COO. That eliminates the conflict of interest. And if they don't accept, then I sell my shares and we start something else, together. The simplicity with which he said it, the willingness to abandon everything, left Chloe speechless. The next day, Christian called an emergency board meeting. Chloe wasn't present, but she watched through the glass of the conference room as Christian presented, argued, defended. 2 hours later, he emerged. His face was neutral, but when he looked at her and nodded, she knew. The board had approved. That afternoon, Christian found her on the building's rooftop, the place where she sometimes went to think. The wind was strong, but the sky was clear. It's done, he said. Starting Monday, you'll be Director of Special Operations, reporting directly to Elena Carter, our COO. Your salary will be 40% higher, and officially, there will be no conflict of interest between us. Chloe looked at him, incredulous. You really did it. I said I would, he replied. Now, can I ask you a question? Anything. Are you still with Daniel? The question was direct, vulnerable. Chloe realized that amidst all the chaos, she'd never formally ended things with Daniel. She pulled out her phone, called him in front of Christian, and the conversation was brief but honest. Daniel, you were right. My heart was never really yours. I'm sorry. When she hung up, Christian was looking at her with an intensity that disarmed her. Now there's nothing in the way, he said, stepping forward. No hierarchy, no other man, nothing but the two of us. He held her face. So tell me, Chloe Cooper, what do you want? And for the first time in 3 years, she had no fear in answering. You. I always wanted you. 6 months later, Kingsley Industries headquarters glowed like a jewel box for the annual company gala. Chloe stood on the mezzanine, watching guests arrive below. She wore a golden dress that seemed made of light itself, her brown hair loose in soft waves. She was no longer the invisible assistant. Now, as Director of Special Operations, she commanded her own team, led strategic projects, and was respected for her brilliance. But the most important change wasn't in the title. It was in how she saw herself, and how she allowed herself to be seen. Christian found her near the bar. He was impeccable in a black tuxedo, but it was the way he looked at her that stole her breath, as if she were the only person in the room. You're late. she teased gently. My fault, he replied with a smile. I was trying to find the perfect gift. He extended a small turquoise box, Tiffany's. Christian, you didn't have to. Open it, he insisted. Inside was a delicate necklace with a key pendant. She frowned, confused, until she saw the inscription on the back. You always had the key. I was just waiting for you to open the door. Tears filled her eyes. Christian. 3 years, he said quietly, fastening the necklace around her neck. 3 years I loved you in silence, thinking I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. From fear, from vulnerability, from feeling. He stepped back to look at her. You taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we need someone. That love isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes us strong. The music changed to something slow. Christian extended his hand. Dance with me? This time, no pretense, no pretending, just us. Chloe took his hand, and they moved to the floor. As they danced, she noticed the looks, not of judgment, but admiration. Their story was known. The CEO who restructured his company for love, the assistant who became an executive through her own merit, a romance that challenged rules but did so with integrity. As the music played, Christian leaned in and whispered in her ear, You were never invisible, Chloe. I always saw you, from the first day. I was just too much of a coward to admit you were everything I always wanted. Chloe smiled, heart overflowing. Well, fortunately, I'm patient with stubborn men. Fortunately, he agreed, kissing her temple. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making up for every lost minute. Later, on the rooftop where they'd had so many important conversations, Christian surprised her again. Candles lit the path, rose petals scattered everywhere, and a single table with champagne. What is all this? Chloe asked, amazed. Christian knelt. The box he opened contained a ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. Chloe Cooper, he said, voice emotional. You transformed my life the moment you entered it. You taught me to feel, to live, to love. You saw through the ice mask I wore and found the man hidden underneath. And now, this man is on his knees, begging you to spend the rest of your life with me. Will you marry me? Chloe was laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her, a kiss that contained 3 years of waiting, 6 months of joy, and a lifetime of promises. 1 year later, on the same rooftop now decorated with flowers and lights, they exchanged vows. An intimate ceremony, just family and closest friends. When Chloe walked to Christian, she saw tears in his eyes, something she never imagined seeing from the impassive CEO she'd met 3 years ago. You were never invisible, he repeated in his vows. You were a light so bright it blinded me, and it took time for my eyes to adjust. But now that I see clearly, I promise to never look away again. She laughed through her tears, and I promise to keep reminding you that the cold, controlled man you think you need to be isn't the man I love. I love the man who cares, who protects, who feels deeply, even when he tries to hide it. They kissed as husband and wife, and the world applauded. But for Christian and Chloe, the world had long ago reduced to just the two of them. 2 hearts who finally had the courage to admit they always belonged together. 3 years after the wedding, Chloe stood in the middle of the empty office space, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, 5 months along, though she'd only just started showing. You're sure about this? Christian's voice came from behind her, warm and concerned. She turned. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with those green eyes that still made her heart skip. But there was something new in his gaze now. Not worry. Trust. I've never been more sure of anything, she said. It had started 6 months ago. A vacation to Santorini that Christian had insisted on. "You need a break," he'd said, even though she loved her work at Kingsley Industries. But the moment she'd stepped off the plane, something had shifted. The whitewashed buildings against impossible blue skies. The narrow cobblestone streets. The elderly Greek woman who'd served them breakfast and told stories of her grandmother's village. Chloe had felt something wake up inside her. Something that had been sleeping since she was a child, drawing faraway places she'd never seen. She wanted to see the world, and she wanted to help others see it too. Director of Special Operations to Travel Agent, Christian mused, walking toward her. Some might call that a downgrade. Some might, Chloe agreed, smiling. But I call it living. His hand joined hers on her stomach. And our little one gets a mother who's actually happy, not just successful. The words settled between them, true and gentle. It hadn't been an easy decision. Chloe had agonized for weeks, leaving the career she'd built, the respect she'd earned, the salary that had finally made her feel secure. But every time she sat at her desk, she'd found herself researching flights to Morocco, hidden villages in Vietnam, family-run inns in Tuscany. Christian had noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Open the agency," he'd said one night, simple and direct. "I'll back you financially. No strings, no expectations. Just be happy, Chloe." She'd cried, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of being seen, of being encouraged to grow, even if it meant growing away from the path they'd been on together. "What if it fails?" she'd whispered against his chest. "Then you'll try something else," he'd replied. "But you won't fail." "I've never seen you fail at anything you actually cared about." Now, standing in this empty space that would become Wanderlust Travel, her agency, her dream, Chloe felt the baby kick for the first time. She gasped. Christian's eyes went wide. "Was that?" "Yes," she laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "That was definitely a kick." He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against her belly, and Chloe ran her fingers through his hair, overcome by the perfect rightness of this moment. 3 years ago, she'd been invisible. A year ago, she'd been a director. Now she was about to be a mother, a business owner, a woman who'd finally learned that success wasn't about climbing higher. It was about building a life she actually wanted to live. "I love you," Christian murmured against her stomach, talking to their child. "And I'm so proud of your mother. She's the bravest person I know." 6 months later, Wanderlust Travel's grand opening drew a surprising crowd. Former colleagues from Kingsley Industries, clients Chloe had worked with, friends, family, and Christian, of course, holding their 2-month-old daughter, Grace, with the careful intensity of a man holding the entire world in his arms. Chloe watched him from across the room, the CEO who'd restructured his entire company for love, now bouncing a baby and completely unfazed by the spit-up on his $5,000 suit. "You did it," Elena Carter, the COO, said warmly, appearing at Chloe's side. "I have to admit, I thought you were crazy leaving. But this..." She gestured to the beautifully designed space, the travel photos covering the walls, the excited chatter of people booking dream vacations. "This is something special." "Thank you," Chloe said, "for everything. For supporting the restructure, for recognizing that love is worth fighting for." Elena smiled. "Please. I've been married 30 years. I know what matters." That night, after the guests had left and Grace was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, Christian found Chloe sitting in her new office, staring at the world map that covered one entire wall. "Where to first?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Everywhere," Chloe whispered. "I want to show Grace everything. I want her to grow up knowing the world is big and beautiful and hers to explore." Christian kissed her temple. "Then we'll start planning. Family trips, adventures, all of it." Chloe turned in his arms. "You'd really take time away from the company?" "Chloe," he said, cupping her face, "you taught me that living isn't the same as existing. That love isn't weakness. that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose happiness over fear. He smiled. If a woman who was invisible can become the most visible force in my life, then a workaholic CEO can learn to take vacations. She laughed, kissing him deeply. And in that moment, surrounded by maps and dreams, with their daughter sleeping nearby and an entire world waiting to be explored, Chloe Cooper Kingsley realized something profound. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, because she thought that's what safety looked like. But real safety wasn't in hiding. It was in being seen, being loved, and having the courage to build the life you actually wanted. Not the life you thought you deserved, not the life others expected, but the life that made you wake up every morning grateful to be alive. And that was everything.